Hey guys, I'm Dav, and today I'm back with more Total War Warhammer 2 online action. As you can see from the angry dwarves with the red mohawks, we're going to be taking the proud Dawi people today up against the Empire. So let's go ahead and take a look at the army compositions. I know I've been playing a lot of Ungrim recently, and typically I haven't been known as a big player of dwarfs. I haven't in patches past, and even in Total War Warhammer 1, I wasn't the biggest fan of them. Some of the changes that they've got in recent patches have made them a lot more viable, and I actually really like where Ungrim himself is at because he's so cheap. He's also anti-large, armor-piercing, unbreakable, just overall a very strong lord, and he doesn't get knocked over quite as often as he used to. He still gets knocked over probably more than I'm comfortable with, but at the end of the day, very cost-effective place right now. We've also got a runesmith here with just the Rune of Wrath and Ruin to make him as cheap as possible. In terms of the rest of the army composition, we've got Slayers, both Dragonback and regular, and one unit I'm super excited for is the Giant Slayers. Curious to know where their price is going to slot in. I'd imagine it'll be 1200 to 1300, or possibly even more considering what you get out of them, but they're definitely going to be a good unit in a matchup like this where you're expecting to face some Knights, Griffins, and so on. So yeah, we've actually got 3 units of Slayers here, including the Dragonbacks. We've also got 2 miners of blasting charges out of the flanks, 2 units of Bugman's Rangers. You guys know I'm a huge fan of these guys, especially their paint scheme, man. I just love the classic blue and red with the gold Stein emblem on their shields. It's super cool. In the front line, we've got Dwarf Warriors, 4 of them, and the Norgrimlings Ironbreakers as the center anchor. These guys are the immovable object that the dwarfs should be. 82 melee defense, 125 armor. They've also got some blasting charges to boot. That's pretty much it, besides the cannon, of course. We do have a Thane in the front line as well with the Tormentor Sword, and yeah, that's pretty much it for the Empire force here. No surprise, we're going to get lots of great swords. We've got 5 units of great swords, 2 spears out on the flanks to fill out some extra numbers. We've also got the Hammer of Witches, regular old General of the Empire. Looks like he's got the movement ability, Foe Seeker. He's also got the Charmed Shield for an additional missile parry and damage resistance. He's also got a Jade Wizard here for healing. Out to the flanks, we've got 2 regular Demigryph Knights and an additional spear. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick the battle into full gear. You watch as the Empire advances up across the mire here. My opponent, for whatever reason, decided to take his cannon up to the high ground when he honestly had the range to sit back here and just fire from this position here, and I think it would have been much better. He had a clean open line of sight to the entire area here, so no real reason to take the time to maneuver all the way up here, but my opponent, I guess, felt the need to, so he's going to move up to that high ground position. And yeah, we're going to continue to fire away. Although the cannon's not really meant as an anti-infantry artillery piece, it can certainly be pressed into that role, as these floppy hats are finding out here. And yeah, it's an interesting matchup. You know, I do think this is a matchup that potentially favors the dwarfs. I'll talk a little bit more about why later on, but who would have thought, man, this if you would have told me in the early patches, especially Total War Warhammer 1, that the dwarfs would be better than the Empire, I would have definitely just laughed you out of the room. But it is the truth now. I think these Demigryph Knights are going to come in for a side charge here on these Dwarf Warriors. Some of them that make contact in the front are going to be subject to that charge defense, but they will do some damage. We're going to drop that Rune of Wrath and Ruin and try to keep them pinned in. Also unleashing some blasting charges. A little bit of friendly fire there, but the Dragonback Slayers are on station to provide that Dragonback debuff. And yeah, looks like my opponent dropping a regrowth there. It hasn't actually dropped any unit models yet, so very well played. You can see this unit of great swords that took the majority of the cannon fire is also now taking a face full of blasting charges, so you know we want some of that cinematic action as these great swords advance here through the fire and flames of the blasting charges. And it does look like the Hammer of Witches is online up on the hilltop there, sniping out some of those Norgrimlings Ironbreakers. Of any target here for the dwarfs, that's definitely the most valuable. and the General of the Empire also flying down and trying to pin down the Nordgrimling's Ironbreakers, but the Thane's right on station to get him with the Tormentor Sword, and now Ungrim is also coming over with the Dragonback Slayers who had pulled back. We are having to send in Slayers against Spearmen here, although this is not really a fight that Slayers are meant for. Because of their high weapon damage and good combat stats, they'll just Shrek these spears, no questions about it. Meanwhile, Demigryph Knights cycle charging through their own lines here, not going to be making the best contact because of the charge defense, and the mixed unit of Miners and Warriors will actually do surprisingly well against things like Greatswords, Rune of Wrath and Ruin, and the power of the Dragonback combining to bring these Demigryph Knights to 3 speed, so they're really struggling to pull back from there. However, the Greatswords are doing a good job of pushing through Dwarf Warriors. Obviously, Greatswords, more than double the cost, should push through Dwarf Warriors relatively easily. But at this point, we're just focusing fire over here on this side of the line because these Demigryph Knights are a pretty high value target. Fortunately, overchasing a little bit here. It looks like actually no, these Slayers going after a full health unit of Spearmen, so just trying to take them down potentially. Nope, looks like we're pulling them back. And yeah, Ungrim and these Slayers were able to seal a little bit of a gap here and push through and get onto these Demigryph Knights who are fleeing because of the power of the Dragonback and the Rune of Wrath and Ruin combining there. So now this other unit of Demigryph Knights blundering over a little bit and being caught up on the Dragonback Slayers and Ungrim himself. Of course, as soon as that Thane has that Tormentor Sword, you know we're going to be dropping it to pin those Demigryph Knights in place. But yeah, at this point, just using the Bugman's Rangers, trying to re-secure them and then fire into the rear of these great swords as they're engaged with the Miners. Of course, Miners with their much worse combat stats will struggle to make any sort of solid contact here, but they might do a tiny bit of damage because they do have some armor piercing. But yeah, you can see the General of the Empire does come down and rout that cannon, which had done some pretty solid work, all things considered. But the Demigryph Knights are starting to fall over a little bit, and my Slayers are going to get caught out here a little bit in this shallow water area here. But of course, they're Slayers. They know no fear. They don't care if they're surrounded by Knights, if they're surrounded by Demons of Chaos, or Greenskins, or what have you. They're going to continue fighting to the bitter end, and these Demigryph Knights are finding that out the hard way, that this Dwarf Nut just simply will not crack, despite the Spearmen and Greatswords surrounding them. They're going to rout off those Demigryph Knights. Greatswords will match up against Slayers, but particularly with the heroic support of Ungrim, because he does armor-piercing damage. And I mean, Slayers themselves have solid AP values. They're not pure AP, obviously, or else we wouldn't be getting Giant Slayers, but they do have decent AP values, and especially with the heroic support here of the Thane and Ungrim, the Slayers should be able to take this engagement. Meanwhile, on the front line, we're starting to deal with some of the units of Greatswords just through pure attrition. Obviously, Nordgrimling's Ironbreakers with their massive melee defense are going to pretty much just parry all of the attacks of the Greatswords. They're going to struggle to make contact. In the back line, though, things are a little bit more desperate here. Bugman's Rangers trying to re-secure and get an open line of fire to start shooting at this General of the Empire here. Of course, only 85 armor, and does have some missile resistance, but he will take damage from focused fire, so we're trying to do so. That being said, he's doing a good job pulling around these different units. Also got the Charm Shield up to give himself some damage resistance and a missile block chance. Miners, though, chasing off some of these great swords here. We also did drop our last charge of Rune of Wrath and Ruin on these Demigryph Knights to slow him down, keep him from engaging on this pocket for a little bit longer here while we try and clean things up in the marshy area. You can see in the riverbed, Ungrim and his throng of Slayers here cleaning up the great swords, routing them off, and now going to be rallying to the very pitched battle on the hill over here. You can see great swords still fighting it out with the Nordgrimling's Ironbreakers, just covered in red head to toe, not only from their armor, but yeah, the Demigryph Knights are still hanging around as well. The Jade Wizard's going to come in for some combat here, but the fact that we're able to re-secure these Bugman's Rangers here, we're going to pull them through these Miners and Dwarf Warriors and pull them into this pocket to try and re-secure. We've also got the Runesmith relatively safe as well. He doesn't have any more Runes of Wrath and Ruin, but still, leadership support is key here. You can see the Hammer of Witches, because of some targeting issues, actually pathed over and came down from the hill. Hasn't ended up using most of his ammunition here, despite the fact that it's had an open time to fire. Hasn't really had anything, you know, attacking it, but these great swords here with the rallying Slayers now coming to the aid of the Nordgrimling's Ironbreakers. We're going to get pitched late game engagement here as the General of the Empire comes down. These Demigryph Knights are also in here. So just the Empire player going all in for a last stand alpha strike here, and it's just about worked. I mean, the Nordgrundling's Ironbreakers are almost routed off here with only 18 unit models, and they are wavering. Thankfully, they're immune to psychology, but the General of the Empire does come down here, but we've got Bugman's Rangers secured. You can see both units firing in, and the cannon crew is back online as well, so we're going to be able to bring them up and reman the cannons. Runesmith in here fighting with all these Slayers, and Ungrim himself doing his work, getting in here with the Axe of Dargo, even though he doesn't actually have it equipped, and they're going to fell that General of the Empire. With him going down, you can see massive shift on the balance of power immediately going in the favor of the dwarfs, and the forces of the Empire are going to admit defeat at that point. So, well played to my opponent. Hope you guys enjoyed watching. It's a fun battle, nice thematic battle. Not super thematic, I guess. I guess maybe it's we could say that this General of the Empire somehow wronged the Slayer King, the dwarfs of Kadrin. And so the Slayer King is coming to exact his oath of vengeance, of course. I'm sure we could make something up along those lines, but at the end of the day, fun battle. And yeah, it's a good battle to kind of illustrate some of the issues with the Empire versus Dwarf matchup. On paper, it seems like the Greatswords would be a no-brainer here. Because they're not the most cost-effective unit in the world, they tend to underperform, especially against things like Longbeards with great weapons, which just have better combat stats overall. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. But in terms of the army breakdown here, I mean, obviously the Slayers are the MVPs here. 100 kills, these ones that got into the Spearmen, 60 and 125, 62 on the Nordgrundling's Ironbreakers. The Cannon was able to get some solid work done despite only getting 23 kills, and did get some chevronage going. Those Miners had those chevrons to begin with, but they also acquitted themselves decently. Ungrim himself racking up 26, 14 for the Runesmith, and 12 for the Thane. Bugman's Rangers getting a few kills, but also getting some key late game fire on that General of the Empire, who himself got 40 kills, 97, 91, 86, and 90. These are primarily against Dwarf Warriors. You can see the one Greatsword in the center that took all that damage on the approach, then just got routed off easily by the Nordgrundling's Ironbreakers. Demogryph Knights didn't end up paying off. Hammer of Witches got some solid kills, and you know, this may seem like an odd pick on paper, but we'll go ahead and take a look at that. So let's go to the Empire now, and we can talk about some things about this particular matchup. And it's tough because if Empire Artillery was more cost effective, I think that this engagement could potentially go more in the favor of the Empire. As it is right now, a lot of the anti-infantry, quote-unquote, Empire Artillery doesn't really work that well. So, you know, let's see here. So yeah, we've got the Dwarfs and we've got the Empire. So if we compare Longbeards with great weapons for 750 points to Greatswords at 950, and we just have a raw stat comparison, you can see the Greatswords have better attack but considerably less defense. They have it's about the same weapon strength, but the Greatswords do have an anti-infantry bonus. Charge bonus is relatively the same. The Longbeards great weapons are slightly slower, and they do have slightly better armor and leadership, but slightly less health and less unit models, more importantly. So it may seem like on paper that the Greatswords will do well, but the thing you have to realize is that the Dwarfs are going to have a lot of support. So things like heroes standing in the middle, or you know, Runes of Wrath and Ruin, or gunpowder units. And because Longbeards with great weapons are significantly cheaper than Greatswords, they're just more cost effective overall, even if they don't necessarily win. If they trade well, that's a cost effective engagement, because it then allows you to spend more on support type troops. They also have charged defense against large, immune to psych, so they're not going to route off to griffins or things like that. I didn't actually bring any of these guys, but they are a good pick. Slayers, of course, are very good here as well. Because the Dawi can kind of beat you in a ranged engagement with Bugman's Rangers, they'll outclass pretty much any of the Empire skirmishers. I mean, obviously, none of your skirmishers have missile block chance or regeneration, so Bugman's Rangers clearly going to outclass you in that department. And you do have cavalry, but the one issue is Demogryph Knights, the ones without halberds, are just in such a weird place. It just doesn't feel like they do very much damage, and I don't know if they have splash attacks, but if not, they should probably get splash attacks to maybe 3 targets or so, because it just seems like they don't do enough damage. Maybe they need more weapon damage and better combat stats. I'm not really sure. But Demigryph Knights, just standard Demigryph Knights, I find not to pay out very often. Even Demigryph Knights with halberds can be tricky to make work. You have to support them appropriately. But yeah, Reiksguard are a pretty solid pick in this matchup. I would rather take Reiksguard than the Demigryph Knights. These guys still have solid AP values, they have a good charge bonus, solid combat stats, and more importantly, they're cheaper. Another good tool in this matchup is the Witch Hunter. Accusation, I imagine this will probably get capped in upcoming patches, but just on his own with the AP missiles, and even if Accusation gets capped at like 2 or 3 casts, I still think that's a pretty cost-effective choice against the dwarves. Depending on what lore of magic you want to take, you may want to take Balthasar Gelt or someone else. Gelt is a little bit of a meme, but honestly he does okay, and if your opponent doesn't bring a Rune Lord, that final transmutation can do a lot of damage, especially if they're in a nice tight Death Star like I was in sub points in that battle. If he had cast that on Ungrim, let's say in that big horde of Slayers he was running with, it would have hit Ungrim, the Thane, and all those Slayers, and would have done an obscene amount of damage to him. So that can potentially be a good pick, although if someone counters you with a Rune Lord, then that'll be a lot less effective. Other lores of magic that are good here, Heavens is one of my favorites. The Curse of the Midnight Wind is just super cost effective with minus armor and melee attack. Very, very good debuff here, especially if you're going with a cheaper front line, something with more like this, where you bring state troops. Now granted, state troops are gonna melt under most dwarf units other than miners, but if you support them with that Curse of the Midnight Wind properly, they can trade pretty well with dwarf warriors, and then that allows you to go a little bit wider in certain other areas. So something like this, where you bring maybe Boris for his self-healing, so that you don't have to worry about any of that. Go ahead and cut the rest of the abilities. You can bring Crush the Weak and the White Cloak of Ulrich if you want. They are potentially good items to have, but for the sake of this, we're going to go ahead and cut them. We'll put this guy up on a horse. You probably don't need Roiling Skies here. Harmonic Convergence is always good. I'd cut Wind Blast, and maybe keep Uranen's Thunderbolt just for a damage option as well, in case you need it. Now, you have some other options, and I was mentioning Empire Artillery. If Empire Artillery is more cost-effective, specifically like the Hellblaster Volley Gun or the Hellstorm Rocket Battery, the Hellblaster Volley Gun can be pretty good. I mean, it's solid, don't get me wrong, and in this matchup, it can be decent, but if the Dwarf player brings a cannon, which they often will just to counter cavalry, then they also act very well as counter artillery batteries, so the dwarf cannons will end up destroying your Hellblaster volley guns and outranging you in that way. So you really need to invest heavily. You could go with something like this and just bring a whole bunch of mortars, but the issue with mortars is they don't do near enough armor piercing to really be effective against the dwarves. The idea, though, with most armies against the dwarves is you want to try and force them to fight on your terms. So if you can outdo them in the artillery engagement or the mobility engagement, potentially you can do so. But yeah, it's an interesting matchup. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Hope you guys enjoyed watching. If you do like this kind of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button, so every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.